Hello everyone, sorry for the delay, but welcome to the week 2 lecture. I'm hoping to get the week 3 lecture out to you all a little earlier, just because I know it's more convenient for all of you to be able to have that information at your disposal, but this is just kind of going through some of the tips and tricks of public speaking, so this will be beneficial to you when you do your informative speech. I think that this has a bit more content than the week 1 lecture did, but hopefully it won't be too long. I want to be respectful of your time, so let's kick it off. So the agenda for this unit or this lecture is I'm going to kind of briefly go over what the assignments for each unit will entail. The Quick Start unit was just kind of like a one-off. It's just so you can get used to speaking, so you're kind of checking out the Canvas site, how to do things, and going forward with the informative public deliberation policy and commemorative speeches, they'll all be in the same format with very little variance. So I just kind of want to go through that so you know what to expect coming up. We'll also be going over Chapter 1, 6 Facts to Know About Public Speaking, and Chapter 3, Anxiety, Strategies That Do and Don't Work. So this is just kind of a screen cap. It's clearly taken from the fall, but it stayed the same. This is what the informative unit will look like, and there are a total of 5 assignments. 2 of them are before you speak, 1 of them is the speech, and 2 will come afterwards. This will be consistent throughout all of the different units. The only slight change, or I guess the only kind of major difference, is that how you can see in the middle it says informative speech outline upload. For the informative and the commemorative, it will be online, so there will also be a video upload component, but it won't be too drastically different. And so I'm just going to kind of go through these one by one to briefly explain them to you so you have a better understanding of what to expect. So the first thing that will be due is the topic proposal for each unit. The one coming up in particular is due on February 7th. I believe so. I could be wrong on that, but no, I don't think I am. So the topic proposal will be February 7th, and what that just is it's a very small point assignment. I believe it's only worth like 2.5 points, but ultimately those do aggregate over 4 different units, so it is kind of a significant chunk of points. It can have influence, and also it's required because I need to make sure that the topic you're selecting is appropriate for the unit we're doing. If you want to talk about how amazing LeBron James is, but it's the public deliberation unit, that doesn't necessarily match up as well as if you did that for the commemorative, for which it would be completely fine. These will kind of probably, this is the assignment that has the most variance. I think the policy unit, you're required to show me like 3 or 4 contemporary sources that you're going to use during the assignment, whereas as you can see for this one, you just need to say your thesis statement, and then a few main points that you have, and so don't wait till last minute because some of them can be a little more intensive. The next assignment that you have that I believe is due on the same day, I apologize that the informative unit is a little wonky this semester. It's just because there's that awkward online to in-person transition and trying to make everything as accessible as possible. So it's unfortunately become a little more condensed than it is normally, but hopefully this will be a smooth transition for us all. But either how, another assignment that you will have, just so I can make sure that you're kind of understanding what the parameters of the speech style that we're talking about is, you're going to prove your knowledge by just kind of finding a video online and then posting about it. You'll just kind of explain, this is why I think it's an informative video, this is some things I think the speaker does well, some things I think that they could work on. Of course, it's very easy for everyone to just type in like YouTube informative speech example, but I'm hoping that this can be a little more fun. I would really enjoy it if you guys found videos from your own realm of interest. Last semester, some one student just consistently did music related videos, like TED Talks about the music industry, a commemorative speech about a musician who had passed. And I think it's a little more engaging when you're able to identify these types of speaking within your own personal life rather than just kind of looking at something for an assignment. But I won't knock you any points if you send a video that just is like informative example. You can do the assignment however you want. Just kind of the purpose is that you're looking out into the world and seeing these things actually happening. And then another part of the assignment is that you'll respond to 2 of your classmates. I appreciate it when the responses have like a little more thought put into them and it's not just like, I agree, this was a cool speech, like put some work into it. But so those are the 2 assignments that will come before you actually speak. It's just to kind of really reiterate what you're doing within the speech, so when you actually go up to prepare and present your own, you have this in the background. The third thing is the outline / for informative and commemorative, the video upload. The outlines are mandatory. If you do not turn in an outline, it's an immediate F. A lot of people think that verbally you do not have to cite your sources as you would in written work, and that's not true. And so the outline is to help me make sure that you're giving credit where credit is due, and it's also just kind of a touch base so I know that you're not going up there and winging it. Some people have that miraculous skill. They absolutely could do that and just impromptu a speech. But for the purposes of all of these assignments, that is not something we want you to do, and the outline helps me see how much you're actually remembering and recalling of the speech, and how effectively you may or may not be utilizing your note cards. I think some people voice concern that writing is not their thing, that you are not like a English first language speaker. That is completely fine. I'm not going to be too critical. These outlines really also are for you to be able to understand what you're saying. So however it's most beneficial to you is completely fine with me. The next thing that you'll do afterwards, it kind of is beneficial just to quickly get it done after you speak. This honestly is probably the easiest assignment. It's just a quick 10 points. All you have to do is say, as it says on here, like what you think you succeeded at, what you think you need to work on, delivery-wise, the actual content-wise, and how you think you're improving within the course. This is just kind of like, have a touch base with me. One of my biggest things that I want you to take away from this class is to leave feeling confident and empowered within your speaking. So if by like speech 5 you're like, I feel like I'm going to throw up every single time I get up there, that's just something that like I would want to work with you with and just like offer you tips and tricks, and then just to make sure that maybe you're not really fumbling very much, but then going on to say, I think that went perfect. Just kind of making sure that you're having an accurate monitor of your own progress within this course. And the last thing that you'll have to do is the feedback form. You can do it over anyone in the class that you want. I'm not going to assign you anyone in particular. So that will inevitably result in some people, usually the people who go first, just because people want to get it over with. The first people will get a lot of feedback forms, whereas maybe the person who goes last gets not as many. Some people don't get any, and don't take that personally at all. It's just a matter of, I want you guys to be able to start analyzing speeches, and I'm so sorry if you hear all that thudding, my neighbors are loud. I want you to be able to look around at a speech and be able to kind of analyze its strengths and weaknesses well. And also, I think it's important that not only are you getting my feedback as an instructor, but you can also kind of see how your speeches are being received by your peers. Also, I don't think you can see my cursor, but at the bottom of this form, you can see peer feedback form, all speeches. You can click on that and download it, and that's what you'll fill out, and you'll just re-upload that to me. And when I send them to your classmates, I'll redact your name. If you ever were rude, which you genuinely shouldn't be, but if it was anything that I thought was overly critical to just being disrespectful, I'm not going to send it to the student. So just something to keep in mind. But about the download thing, the outline form for assignment 3, that's essentially how it'll look too. If you want to quickly pull an outline example, you can go to where you'll turn it in, and there's kind of a document like that. You can download it, and you can base your outline off of that. Don't plagiarize it and just like copy and paste your own words. It's not like a Mad Lib or something. It's just so you can look at it and kind of understand what type of outline is being required from the speech. So those were the assignments of the semester. Generally, I think that they're pretty easy to just quickly get done. Some people might find them a little tedious, but if you get a head start on them, they should be relatively easy. And then, so moving on, we're going to talk about Chapter 1, which is 6 facts to know about public speaking. This will contain quite a bit of me just reading off of the screen. Sorry about that. That's not one of the best speaking tips, but just for the sake of if you don't necessarily want to look at the screen and you would rather just listen to the lecture, that's completely fine. So what is public speaking? Public speaking is a common, widespread act that holds an important place in our societies. It is speech in, by, and for the people. So it's not just you in your apartment kind of having a soliloquy to yourself. That is a type of speaking, but unless you're recording it and uploading it, it is not a public form. 6 facts to know. We'll go over all of these in depth on the other slide, but just a quick run through. It is a form of communication. It is always goal-oriented. It has personal, professional, and public dimensions. It's cultural, a form of free expression, and is an ethical undertaking. So number 1, public speaking is a form of communication. What is communication? The exchange of symbols between people in an effort to understand or influence each other's perception of the world. This is something that we all should probably know. Public speaking is something that is inevitable. It is a requirement at the university for almost all majors, but unlike maybe math or science requirements, which you might go and do and then later in life not really utilize those skills as much, public speaking is something that will inevitably be something that you run into probably on a day-to-day basis in one way or another. Something that might have caught you a little bit is the fact it's the exchange of symbols and not necessarily the exchange of words, and that's because communication is more than just the spoken word or the words that you choose. It's tone, it is how you move your hands, it is the space, it is a quirk of an eyebrow, a little lilt of your lips. It's a bunch of symbols that go into how your message is received, which I think is on the next slide. Yeah. This is the standard model of communication. It might be familiar to some of you. This is something where you can find more in-depth definitions in your textbook, but I'm just going to kind of explain it to you with this diagram in mind. So starting from the left, first of all, as you can notice, it's a back and forth thing. We're starting from one way to another just to see the process, but it's not just a one-way thing unless you're maybe giving a lecture, but still, even or like a TED Talk or anything like that, even a podcast where you can't necessarily listen to audience response, but there's always some sort of give back. But either way, so it starts off with a sender who has something they want to transmit, something they want to say. They will send the message with encoding. So we're focusing on that first word. And that is just kind of to embed your message with intention, what you want the person receiving it to understand. This could be overt with your word choice, like, I am so mad at you. Or it could be implicit, like, well, I just think it's funny that you never do this, that, or the other thing. And in both of those, depending on how good the decoding of the receiver is, they will receive the message, the sender is mad. So there are just different levels of encoding that can go on, and that's just something to take into consideration. Then moving on is the medium, how the person chooses to send this message. This can be verbally, it can be over text, it can be a written message that you write out. But in all of these, as you can see at the top of the screen, there is different noise that might happen. And noise is something that disrupts how the message is received. So the other day when I was trying to give this lecture, I kept coughing. Coughing is noise in verbal communication. Not only just literally it's noise, but because since I'm coughing, you can't understand what I'm trying to say as much as I wish you could. If it was text, maybe you're typing it out and you accidentally send the message too fast. That's a type of noise because immediately it disrupts how the receiver will receive the message. And then we're going, and now it's kind of in the receiver. Once it's passed through the medium, once you've said the words, once you've sent the message, it is in the receiver's hand, and they have to decode the message. And that was what we were talking about in terms of the MAD example. Someone could accurately decode a message. They could see that I am mad and be like, oh damn, the sender's mad. Or they could see, I just think it's funny that you never do anything with me. And they could receive that in a different way, not necessarily negative, but just, oh, like, what do you mean? And it could lead to confusion, which wasn't the encoder, the sender's original intent. So they'll acknowledge the feedback, they'll respond, and then it flips back to the other way. And so it's just kind of a continuing cycle. That little squiggly line you see at the bottom called feedback, that is just kind of if we were face to face and I said something to you and you made a face at me, I'm getting feedback from you. You haven't said anything, I'm still in the middle of saying my message, but I can tell how my message is potentially being received right off the bat from feedback. And then these are the different types of communication. Honestly, if you want to take a screenshot of this or take a picture of it or whatever, this will be very vital for your quiz. I'm going to take a quick drink of water before continuing. But so these are the different types of communication that can happen. The first one being intrapersonal communication, which is communication that takes place within a person's own mind, primarily through thinking and internal dialogue. So, thoughts, something that we are all just familiar with. No need to really go in depth into that one. Something to just pay close attention to is the prefix intra and inter, just are almost dead ass similar. They're almost the same thing. So just take note of the different prefixes because they mean different things. But interpersonal communication, communication that takes place between 2 to 3 people, typically concerns the creation, maintenance, or dissolution of personal relationship. So just imagining essentially being with like 2 or 3 of your friends, you're talking to them in a way that is drastically different than you would talk while giving a presentation to your classmate. It is a type of communication that's with another person, but genuinely, as it says, when you're talking to a small group of people, you're usually concerned about, like, how was your day? Like, oh my God, my boyfriend broke up with me. Like, it's small details, like talking about a personal thing. Even if it was with someone that you maybe didn't know, usually the engagement is probably about something relatively personal. Group communication, communication that takes place within and between large institutions and their members. Just imagining like a work meeting essentially, anything of that sort. Our class is group communication because we have like 9 people max at a given time face to face. We're all here for the same thing, blah, 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 blah. Mass communication, communication that takes place through media of many kinds, including television, film, and social or print media, and is transmitted to large audiences. So that keyword mass means it is marketable, it is easily transmittable, something to consider. Public communication, communication that takes place between a speaker or speakers and an audience with the aim of engaging that audience on a topic of shared concern about public interest, always done in a public setting. So honestly, if you've seen Parks and Recreation, anytime they go to town hall and like Leslie's asking the community, hey, so how do all of you feel about this, blah, 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 she is engaging in public communication, which is different than group communication because group is usually something more organized, whereas anyone might come to this public communication setting. 2, public speaking is always goal-oriented. There are 2 different things to consider here. There are minor goals, small targeted tasks that the speaker hopes to achieve over the course of the speech in order to improve its effectiveness. Those are just kind of like the small delivery things of, okay, so when I get up there and speak, I don't want to mess with my hair a lot. I need to take into consideration how much I'm moving my body. Something like a minor goal that I personally have is I'm trying not to say very much. As you've seen, I've been relatively unsuccessful in that. But like those are just small things that you're trying to do because you know if I say too much, if I'm constantly playing with my hair, if I'm doing this, or that, it's going to affect how people receive the speech because it's less likely they'll leave with your words in mind and it's more likely they'll be like, oh, yeah, wait, what was it about? All I knew was that she had really long hair. Like, I don't know. The primary goal is the single focused overarching achievement the speaker hopes to attain with their audience by the end of the speech in order to be successful. So this is your goal. For all the assignments in the class, it is usually to get a good grade, to tell your classmates about this certain subject. In other settings, it might be to give a speech about like the inaugural address. The primary goal was unification, different things like that. 3, I'm sorry if you can hear my cats trying to fight each other. I'm haphazard in this video. 3, public speaking has personal, professional, and public dimensions. This is where types of communication come into play, like interpersonal, group, mass, public, etc. Are you talking because you're trying to establish a better relationship, trying to form bonds? Are you doing it because you're trying to impress your boss? Are you trying to do it to move a large group of people? That really depends on what type of communication you're in. 4, public speaking is cultural. So this is just an example. Public speaking goes back to before anything else, essentially. As soon as language happened, people were doing this. But the earliest practices of speech making and storytelling by which society shared and passed on histories, common sense, and culture are what we refer to as oral traditions. So that's just kind of the roots of public communication. And then 2 things to take into consideration are when we say cultural, you might be thinking of the dominant paradigm, which is speaking should be formal, rational, emphasize Western values, and be practiced almost exclusively by white men. This is something we're trying to deconstruct. Like, genuinely no offense, white men, but just dominantly that has been all we've seen for a long amount of time. Speaking has been something kind of hefted on the shoulders of those deemed worthy of the art, white men. But stop, fuck. And then we're trying to move more towards multicultural paradigm, which acknowledges that there are many speaking traditions and ways in which those traditions can be integrated or used independently for effective and confident public speaking. So putting this kind of into layman's terms, we're trying to acknowledge that the Western idea of speaking, which is go up there, be formal yet casual, make direct eye contact with everyone, be personable, use your body. Those are nice characteristics, but there are other cultures where making eye contact is a sign of disrespect. To move your hands a lot means like offensive things. The more rigid you are, the stronger in conviction you are about what you're saying. It's just different things like that that change up how we need to analyze speaking. So just because one speaker is utilizing different tactics, that does not mean that they are a bad speaker. It easily could be that's just their preferred method of speaking. 5, public speaking is a form of free expression. Free expression, speech making, is an exercise of the human right to share ideas and opinions with others without interference from governments or other form of authority. So, free speech, essentially. I'm sure all of us are familiar with that. It's a very hot topic. And I believe there's more. Here we are. You might be thinking, okay, so I can say anything I want in the classroom. There are certain limits and guidelines to follow. Things that are not protected by free speech are free speech exemptions, which qualifies as incitement, speech that advocates the use of force in a lawless and immediate way. Not even trying to be political, just trying to be timely, but I'm sure we have all seen this within our social media feeds. We've heard it on the news, but we have seen an example of incitement by use of Twitter by Trump, in the fact that he said something that was then perceived to try to instigate something or incite something, and people stormed the Capitol and a lot of violence happened because of it. So that's just an example. That's not me imbuing my personal beliefs on you. Just simply that is incitement, not protected. Defamation, a knowingly false statement made in public that harms the reputation of another person or entity. This can happen in 2 ways. If you say it verbally, it is slander. If you say it, or if you write it, or just like imbue it in an image, it is libel. These are things that journalists often have to qualify with. If a celebrity is suing a magazine like OK or People or something like that, it is usually libel. But slander isn't necessarily someone coming up and being like, our professor's name is Anne, when it's Nicole. That really, like, doesn't matter at all, and it doesn't ruin my reputation or anything. But if I were to go up and be like, oh, I heard a fellow professor is having an inappropriate relationship with a student, and it's not true, that is slander, because that could have serious ramifications on someone's career. So slander is kind of dependent on this level of severity, but that's just one of the free speech exceptions. And then hate speech is not a free speech exception, which might shock some, might not shock others. But hate speech that offends, threatens, or insults groups based on race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, or other traits. One of the reasons your book kind of goes in depth, but some of the reasons that hate speech is not a free speech exception is because it's hard to say, like, who is to say what is offensive or not. Language changes over time. For example, the word queer in the 80s would have been an awful slur to use, and in the 2020s, it is a completely valid and respected identity group. But you can also definitely see how words are used differently depending on certain people. Some people can be, hey, I'm queer, whereas maybe the older generation are using it in that derogatory manner, and those things are happening concurrently. So who's to say what to ban? Are we to ban one person saying something over another person saying it? And then your book also says that usually when hate speech is banned, it is the marginalized groups that suffer more than anyone else. And last but not least, 6, public speaking is a moral and ethical undertaking. So morals, personal and consistent principles that individuals use to determine what is good and bad. Ethics, the socially defined expectations of good and bad behavior. So what we mean by public speaking is a moral and ethical undertaking is that you want to go up there and you want to establish trust, you want to establish credibility. No one wants a speaker to go up and we're all assuming that they are going to be deceitful and untrustworthy, because then what's the point even? Values prioritized in public speaking are accuracy, honesty, transparency, empathy, vulnerability, accountability, authenticity, consistency. I'm going to take a drink. Those are things that we hope people are prioritizing because they're traits that make us trust you more. And then another characteristic of public speaking is that we want to reject hate speech. We want to reject demagoguery, which is a speaker who is trying to incite people essentially and is relying on prejudice rather than actual rationale, and rejecting baseless claims. So, for example, within the class, we're all here. If someone was to say something very offensive, it's likely that instead of potentially riling everyone up and making them feel called out directly by the instructor, I might say something depending on the level of severity. I will probably send an email after class. But if you, as a fellow listener, just as much as hate speech is allowed, technically, quote unquote, so is you refuting it. If you want to have a conversation with your classmate of raising your hand and being like, I think that was disrespectful for this reason, you're absolutely allowed to do that. And that is just kind of what that entails. So then moving on, chapter 3, which is relatively short. I guess another caveat is that this is an important chapter because I did see in a lot of your introductions, as some of you might have seen yourself, but a lot of you are very nervous about public speaking, which is a completely normal and rational thing. One of the most common fears in the United States, aside from death, is public speaking, because it is a very intimidating and vulnerable thing to have to do. So hopefully we can work through the semester and you can learn that it's very chill. We're all here to support each other. And hopefully this chapter might have some tips that might help you as you go on. So these are some myths about public speaking. 1, everybody is a naturally good communicator. Just like any other talent or skill, public speaking is something that you can improve upon over time, something that I'm hoping that all of you will do in the duration of this course, even if you are starting off from a place of confidence. Sometimes people just need to learn. There are people who just naturally, it just comes second nature to them to be able to speak in front of audiences, but more often than not, that is not the case. Either you have it or you don't. Just because you've had unsuccessful public speaking experiences in the past, that does not mean that you're doomed for life, that you will never succeed in this. It's just like the top one, something everyone needs to work at. Public speaking is just reading out loud. No. Everyone knows how boring it is when you're watching a speech and the person just has a piece of paper right in front of their face and they're reading every single thing. It's distracting, and it almost appears like the speaker doesn't have much regard for the content matter they're speaking on if they couldn't take time to memorize what it is. If you're just reading a book out loud, let's say to a classroom, that's completely different. In that case, that totally makes sense. But in a public speaking platform, no. Substance without style or style without substance. Sometimes when you're feeling insecure about not knowing the content that you're speaking on, you might start to become very exaggerated with your gestures, really rely on being charismatic. Everyone likes a charismatic speaker that makes the audience feel good, but if you're ultimately going, so yeah, I'm so glad to be here, da-da-da-da, you're not saying anything. At the same time, if you're not trying to imbue any sort of positive delivery of your speech and you're just, as the above one said, just reading monotonously off of a piece of paper, but you do have really good information, it's boring. No one wants to hear that. So it's just kind of you can't prioritize one over the other because they're two things that work together and are important to respect. Speed solves everything. A lot of people are so nervous about going up. They're like, okay, I'm just going to quickly get this done, get this over with. And when you talk too fast, people can't understand you and people have a hard time keeping up. So that's not necessarily true. It might be good for you because you can get it over faster, but also at the same time, you might be speaking so fast that you start to lose your breath, you start to hyperventilate a little bit. It's not as positive of a thing as people think. Procrastination. Some people think that they work better under pressure. To be honest, that is a fatal flaw of mine as well. But it's not necessarily true, especially when so many of these speeches require a lot of background research and a lot of trying to find information. Not having proper amount of time to be able to practice it and to make sure you're confident in what you're saying will detrimentally affect you. Don't wing it. As I said earlier, it becomes very obvious. I'll also have your outline. If you're just winging it, that might be one thing for like the quick start speech when it genuinely is something that you know about that would be like 2 minutes to talk about. That's one thing, but no one wants to sit through like an 8 to 11 minute speech where someone's just rambling because they weren't prepared. Picturing the audience naked. Don't do that. It's 2020. Also, could you imagine how weird it was if it's weird enough when people say that to a whole room full of people, like, I'm gonna picture you naked. But imagine if that was individualized. Like, if you looked one of your classmates in their eyes and said, I'm gonna picture you naked while I speak. That's creepy and gross. Like, ew. And also, I think your textbook says that oftentimes it makes people more nervous. It can lead to uncomfortable situations if you're trying too hard. Just overall, that's awful advice. Don't do that. Or if you're doing it, God, please don't tell me. Public speaking anxiety, speech making, nerves, and apprehension. Public speaking anxiety is a common form of nervousness people feel before, during, and or after speaking before groups of people in a public setting. So, just public speaking anxiety can kind of replicate an anxiety attack, especially because this is something, the reason that it has almost its own term instead of just being called usual nerves or anxiety is that people who usually don't suffer from anxiety or any sort of anxiety disorders can feel this specific situational form of anxiety called public speaking anxiety because so many people do get that uncomfortable when talking in front of a big group. It is a very vulnerable thing. Sometimes this manifests verbally, your throat closing up, having a hard time controlling your breathing, which also is like a physical aspect as well. It can manifest in shaky hands, locking your knees, which can make you pass out. Like, there are strong levels of severity going from just blinking too much and speeding through it to throwing up in front of your classmates. This is something that is very serious. Genuinely, I can guarantee you that almost, at least at any given time, 7 out of 8 people within the class are experiencing some varying level of public speaking anxiety. And I am very conscious of that. So genuinely, when that's happening, never on your critique forms will I be like, well, your hands were shaking and it was really distracting. Not at all. Like, it's very uncomfortable to be in front of people and experience this. So I don't want you to, and once you start thinking about it too much, like, oh my God, okay, I'm speaking too fast, I can't breathe, my heart is pounding, like, it starts to take you out of the speech and the speech is negatively affected. Rather, I would want you to go up and be like, I'm a bit uncomfortable right now, but I'm just going to focus on what I'm saying. And then once you start doing that, and instead of your anxiety being at the forefront of your mind and the speech being at the forefront of your mind instead, it's likely that the anxiety will start to kind of like flow away. Is that optimistic thinking? Yes. But is it true? Also yes. Effective strategies for managing public speaking anxiety. Be confident in what you're going to say. I genuinely choose topics that interest you. Choose topics that you are excited to speak about. I know that there are certain qualifications, like you need to choose something kind of relevant to your audience, or at least something that you can make relevant to your audience. The public deliberation one and the policy ones are kind of a little more nitpicky, but still you can choose something that you feel passionately about while talking about this. I'm not picky. I'm not going to be like, oh, it seems like you're having too much fun with this. Choose something more boring. Like, you don't have to just Google top 10 speech ideas for public deliberation. I mean, we'll get into it more later on during these units, but genuinely, like with policy speaking, when you do the basic ones of like abortion, gun rights, gay marriage, blah, 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 everyone is coming into the room with a fully formed idea on this, so it's not even going to be effective in the first place because it's unlikely that a 4-minute speech in just like a transitory amount of time will make the change that you might be hoping to affect with this type of speech. So instead, choose something niche. Choose something like, one of my students last semester was super into cars, so he did something about like sustainability and if we should go green in trucks, then the pros and cons. I don't know cars, so I don't fully understand. But it was something he was passionate about, and you could see that it was something he was happy to speak on. Prepare in advance. Obviously, we all know or have been burned by procrastinating too hard. Practice, practice, practice. I would caution, it's kind of like a double-edged sword of practicing is so vitally important, but at the same time, if you practice it to where you have given yourself no flexibility, which goes into the next one, and you have practiced saying it word by word by word by word invariably or without any flexibility, that can lead to, if you accidentally stumble, you almost crumble completely and you can't figure out how to like reboot yourself. So just taking that into consideration. It does kind of suck to be like practice, but not too much. But just make sure that you feel confident. That word will be used 1,000 times. I'm so sorry. But be nice to yourself. Be as in control as possible. This one's kind of more so speaking on broad terms, not just within this specific class, but in terms of when you give a speech in the future. Select the date and time of your speech. Select the order of your speech. Know your speech requirements. That one's definitely a class one. This is just continued strategies for managing. Get to know your audience and environment. That's something I'm going to try to cultivate within our class, of feeling comfortable with one another, knowing one another. Visit your speech site in advance. Obviously, you guys have to come to class, so. Anticipate and relieve stress. Be well rested. Eat healthy, consistently, and strategically. Provide outlet for existing stress, and what that kind of means is your textbooks gave the examples of like exercising in some capacity beforehand can like kind of just reset your body. This isn't me being inappropriate. Your textbook literally says this, but it says that having sex before a speech can be beneficial. To each their own, whatever you determine is best for you. But just kind of make sure that you're not coming to class like you've spent the entire night, you're pulling an all-nighter on this speech, you're exhausted, you can barely focus, because it will come through in your speech. Introduce comfort items. This isn't necessarily like bringing up like your childhood blanket or something like that. But just kind of wear something that maybe you feel comfortable in. That's another thing I'm big on in this class, is you don't have to come to speech days like dressed to the nines. Speak in what you're comfortable in right now, because this is the time when I want you to start to like really be confident in your skills. This isn't what not to wear. I don't care about what you're dressed as. But that's kind of like what introduce comfort items is. If you feel more confident wearing your glasses because you feel like you can hide behind them, no one will know that except you. Just different things like that. Be realistic. You're not going to probably change the world within the speech. Most of your goals will probably be, I want to get a good grade. And with these critique sheets I'll be giving you, there will kind of be goals to work on, of like, my realistic goal is that I want to stop pausing, for example. Just something like that to consider when you're speaking. And it looks like that was the last slide. Thank you so much if you actually listened to this the whole way. I predict that's maybe 2 of you. But thank you so much. I hope that this was beneficial to you. I'm sorry that it is running kind of long, but I look forward to, I guess, being virtual with you next week. And then the week afterwards, we will meet. But take care of yourself, have a good time, and bye.